Rain pressed hard against the windows of Ethan Miller's small Seattle apartment the night everything began. It's the kind of rain that made the city feel closer and lonelier at the same time. And Ethan was trying to finish work when his phone lit up with a message that made his chest tighten, because it was from Claire Bennett. A name that always carried history, comfort, and something unfinished. She didn't text often, not like this, and her words were short and serious. Asking if they could meet because there was something important they needed to discuss, and Ethan immediately knew this was not casual. Claire and her husband Daniel were not just friends, they were part of his past, part of his steady adult life, people who had stood beside him through job changes, breakups, and long talks about dreams that never quite landed where they were supposed to. The next afternoon, they met at a quiet cafe near the water, the kind of place where conversations felt private even when people were nearby. And Ethan noticed right away that Claire looked nervous, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee, while Daniel sat upright and calm, but his eyes gave him away. After a few polite words, the silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Until Claire finally spoke, saying they wouldn't be there if it wasn't important. Saying they trusted Ethan more than anyone else, and that trust alone made his stomach knot. Daniel followed, explaining they were planning to leave Seattle for a year because of a job opportunity. A move that sounded normal at first, but something in his tone told Ethan that was only the surface. Claire leaned forward then, her voice steady but soft, saying they needed help while they were gone, not just with practical things, but with something deeper they didn't know how to explain easily. Ethan tried to keep his face calm, but his thoughts raced because nothing about this felt simple anymore. When Daniel finally said they wanted Ethan to stay in their house while they were away, the words landed with weight, not because house sitting was unusual, but because of the way they said it, like it meant more than keys and locked doors. Claire added that the house held memories, unfinished questions, and parts of their lives they weren't ready to leave behind. And they needed someone they trusted to keep it safe, not just physically, but emotionally. Ethan felt the room shrink as he realized this request wasn't about convenience. It was about something fragile between them, something they were afraid to face alone. He asked what they truly expected from him, and Claire said they needed presence, honesty, and someone who understood them without judgment. And that answer stayed with him because it felt too close to the heart. Ethan looked at them both, seeing the cracks beneath their calm expressions, and he understood they were standing at a turning point, sure if distance would heal them or pull them apart. He didn't give an answer right away, because the request carried responsibility he had never imagined. And yet, even as he walked away from the cafe later, the rain returning, the city buzzing around him, he knew his life had already shifted, because sometimes the most unexpected questions arrive quietly. And once they do, there is no real way to step back. Ethan did not sleep much that night, because the words Claire and Daniel had spoken kept circling in his mind. And by morning he understood that what they asked was only the beginning, not the full truth. So, when they met again the next day in the same quiet cafe, the air felt heavier, like something was about to be uncovered. Claire spoke first, explaining that Daniel's offer in Toronto was real and important. But the move had forced them to face questions they had ignored for years, questions about distance, about dreams that changed, and about the quiet emptiness that can exist even inside a good marriage. Daniel admitted that they loved each other deeply, but love alone had not answered everything. And the thought of leaving their home made them realize how much of themselves was tied to that place. Ethan listened closely, realizing they were not asking him to fix anything, but to witness something they could not yet name. Claire told him the house was full of memories, late-night talks, shared hopes, and silent disappointments. And they were afraid that walking away from it without care would feel like giving up on parts of themselves. They trusted Ethan because he had always seen them clearly, never judging, never pushing, and they believed his presence there would keep the house and their truth honest. Ethan asked what would happen while they were gone, and Daniel said, There were no rules, no expectations beyond respect and openness, which somehow made the situation feel even more serious. Claire added that they wanted Ethan to live normally, to feel the house, to notice what felt warm and what felt empty, because when they returned, they needed to understand what had changed and what had not. The pace of the conversation quickened. As emotions rose and Ethan realized they were standing at a fragile edge, not broken, but uncertain, trying to face their lives without running from discomfort. He felt pulled in two directions, one part of him wanting to protect his own peace, the other feeling honored by the trust placed in him. Ethan admitted that he had his own doubts about relationships, about staying, about whether people grow together or simply grow used to each other. And his honesty seemed to relieve them, as if they had been waiting for someone to say those words out loud. Claire's eyes softened when she said that maybe this year apart was not about distance, but clarity, and Daniel agreed, saying that sometimes people need space not to escape, but to listen. Ethan asked if they were afraid, and Claire answered yes without hesitation, because fear meant the choice mattered. As they talked, time passed quickly, cups emptied, and the cafe filled and emptied again, but their focus never broke. Because this conversation felt like a turning point for all of them. When they finally stood to leave, nothing was fully decided, but everything was clearer, and Ethan felt the weight of what saying yes would mean. He walked away knowing that agreeing would place him inside a story that was not his alone. A story built on trust, silence, and emotional risk. And though the uncertainty scared him, it also stirred something hopeful, because sometimes being asked to stand still in someone else's life is the bravest role of all. Ethan moved into Claire and Daniel's house 2 weeks later, carrying a mix of nervousness and curiosity. And the moment he stepped through the front door, the familiar smell of polished wood and faint coffee felt like stepping into someone else's memories while trying to make them his own. The house was quiet in a way that pressed on him at first, each creak of the floorboards echoing in the empty rooms. But as he unpacked a few things and arranged his space, he began to notice its rhythms. The way sunlight spilled across the living room in the afternoon, how the kitchen still smelled faintly of baking from months before, and how small details like framed photos and little notes around the house carried pieces of Claire and Daniel's lives he had never fully seen before. At first, he followed a routine, watering plants, sorting mail, and keeping things in order. But the quiet soon gave him time to think, and in those moments, he realized that living there was not just about physical space. It was about holding emotional space for two people he cared about deeply. The calls from Claire and Daniel came regularly, sometimes together, sometimes alone, and their voices carried hints of longing, questions, and trust that Ethan found both comforting and unsettling. They asked about the house, about how it felt, with him there, but their questions always seemed to be about more than the house itself, about whether someone could truly feel the life they had left behind, and if their absence would change the way it existed. Ethan found himself sharing parts of his own life he had kept quiet for years. His worries, his small failures, and even the loneliness that came from relationships that never lasted. And strangely, it felt easier to speak in the quiet presence of their home, surrounded by traces of their lives. One evening, Claire called while Ethan was sitting on the back porch. And the rain had started again, light and steady, tapping against the roof as she said she missed it, the life they had. The energy they carried before, pretending everything was perfect. 10. Ethan realized that her words were as much about needing understanding as about wanting company. He didn't offer solutions, only listened, and in that listening, an unexpected bond deepened. Not romantic, not complicated in a forbidden way, but emotional, strong, and human, built on honesty, presence, and care without expectation. Days and weeks passed quickly, the house filling with small routines and quiet reflection. And Ethan began to feel part of something larger, connected to both Claire and Daniel in ways he had never anticipated, holding the space they could not hold themselves. He noticed small changes in himself, to patience, empathy, understanding that emotional courage sometimes meant sitting quietly and witnessing rather than acting, and the awareness that life could teach lessons without dramatic moments. He realized that the request they had made of him, simple on the surface, had opened a door into their lives and his own heart, showing him that trust and presence could shape experiences far beyond what he expected, and that being part of someone's story, even temporarily, could leave a lasting mark on his own journey. In the quiet of that house, surrounded by memories and conversations, Ethan understood that sometimes the most profound connections come not from romance or passion, but from empathy, honesty, and the willingness to simply be there when someone needs you, and that what he felt in that space was something rare, meaningful, and deeply human. Nearly a year passed, and the day Claire and Daniel returned to their Seattle home arrived faster than Ethan expected, and when he opened the door to greet them, he felt a mixture of relief, excitement, and quiet tension, because the house had changed with him in it, and he wondered if they would notice, if they would see how much care, attention, and thought he had put into keeping not just the space, but the energy alive while they were away. Claire stepped in first, her eyes scanning the living room, lingering on familiar details, and she whispered softly that it felt the same, yet different. And Ethan understood immediately that she sensed the subtle ways life had moved forward even in their absence. Daniel smiled as he followed, noticing small adjustments in the furniture. The neatness, the sense that someone had truly lived there and respected the home. And the way they both looked around made Ethan realize that what they wanted from him all along had been deeper than chores or keys. They wanted presence, care, and someone to reflect back to them what their life felt like when they were apart. That night, the three of them sat together in the living room, the rain outside replaced by the soft glow of city lights through the windows. And they shared stories about the year apart, about what they had learned, the challenges, and the little victories that had filled their days. And Ethan listened, aware that the dynamic between them had shifted, not in dramatic ways, but with quiet understanding and gratitude. Claire turned to him, her expression soft, and asked if he regretted agreeing to their unusual request. And Ethan thought carefully before answering that he did not, because living in their home had taught him more about honesty, empathy, and emotional courage than he could have imagined. And that sometimes the most meaningful experiences come not from choice, but from trust placed in you by others. Daniel nodded, agreeing that their time apart had been full of lessons too, that they had seen clearly what mattered in their life together, what needed attention, and what was stronger than ever. And Ethan felt a sense of fulfillment knowing he had helped create that space without ever stepping beyond boundaries or expectations. There were no dramatic confessions, no sudden revelations, only a shared understanding that all three of them had grown, learned, and felt deeply connected through respect, trust, and care. And in that quiet clarity, Ethan realized that the love and friendship among them was not about excitement or tension, but about maturity, emotional honesty, and standing together in moments of vulnerability. Claire reached for Daniel's hand and thanked Ethan again for holding the space they could not. And he smiled, feeling a calm warmth settle over him, knowing that his role had mattered, that the subtle presence he had offered had shaped their experience and preserved their trust. As Ethan left later that night, walking back into the glowing city streets, he reflected on the lessons of the past year, understanding that some requests may seem ordinary at first, but carry profound responsibility, and that being part of someone's life in a meaningful way can teach patience, empathy, and courage without drama or disruption. He understood that the story was not about heroics or romance in the usual sense, but about growth, connection, and emotional depth, and that these quiet bonds built on trust and care could last longer and touch lives more deeply than any dramatic moment ever could. As he looked back at the house one last time that evening, Ethan felt gratitude, clarity, and a quiet romantic sense of fulfillment, knowing that being asked to step into someone's life and answer their unspoken need had changed him forever, leaving him richer in understanding, human connection, and the beauty of relationships lived with honesty and care.